Hey everybody, it's Jay Gordon. How are you today? Welcome back. Welcome back here to Azure FunBytes, where every week we get together and what do? We talk about the different products, services, all the things that make up Azure and that you can use to have an incredible Azure experience. So today we're going to talk about a really awesome subject. It is static web apps. But before I talk about that, I just wanted to say, hey, guess what it is today? It's Azure FunBytes' birthday. We're a year old. Yes, we're a year old. I've been doing this for you every week for almost a year now. We've on our 38th show. I haven't really missed many, and I'm really glad you all got to be part of this. It's been so fun to get together with everybody every week, have these conversations, learn something, and obviously get more information about Azure. So, in order to get some more information about Azure today, I've got a guest. The guest is amazing. We're going to really learn a whole bunch. But before we get into that, what I'd like to do is play this video for you so you can get a little bit of an idea of what it is we're going to be talking about, which is Azure Static Web Apps.
Can I deploy my Nuxt.js websites on Azure Static Web Apps in a single command line? No, but you can do it using a Nuxt.js module. So Nuxt.js is built using a modular system, which makes it very easy to create modules and plugins. You can create a module, upload it to npm, and then share it with the Nuxt.js community. But deploying on Azure Static Web Apps is actually really easy. So all you have to do is once you've added your GitHub repo, you just need to modify the build command to be nuxt generate in your package.json. Then configure the build process in the Azure portal and add the dist folder as your application. Then just click Review and Create, and your Nuxt.js static website will be deployed in minutes. It really is as easy as that.
And hey, guess what? My guest is here. It's none other than Anthony Chu. Hey, Anthony, how are you today?
Hey Jay, I'm doing well. Happy birthday to your show. I actually on Twitter I asked whether or not you're going to have cake, and I saw a cake there, so that's good job. I should have been more specific and asked for a physical cake, but that graphic is good enough, I guess.
Well, it's a little tough. I believe you're on the other side of the country than I am, and so it would be a little difficult for me to be able to bring you some cake. So I guess for now that GIF is going to just have to do.
All right.
So before we kind of get started on what it is we're going to be talking about, which is Azure Static Web Apps, I wanted to kind of ask you a few questions. But before I do that, I want to let everybody know that, as usual, every week we have our poll. We want to make sure that you take part in our poll. And the question this week is, are you using a static web app for your website? Yes or no, or maybe it's complicated. You let me know what it is you're working on. We want to hear back from you. We always like it when you take part. So if you want to answer, I should say, answer our poll, that'd be great. We'd also love it if you send questions so that Anthony can help us learn more from your questions. So cool, Anthony. You're a program manager with Microsoft. You're working on static web apps. You're working on Azure Functions. How'd you get here?
How did I get here? Well, I was born in I guess I joined Microsoft about 4 years ago. Time just kind of flew by. I initially joined as a cloud developer advocate, same team as you. And then a couple years ago, or a year and a half ago, I moved over to the Azure Functions team as a program manager. And more recently, also started working on Azure Static Web Apps as well.
Very cool, very cool. And so let me ask you first, what's your favorite language to do development in?
I think it's a toss-up between JavaScript and C#. It really depends on, I don't know, like maybe the day of the week. These days, when I try to do something quick, it's probably JavaScript and Node. But yeah, like I'm more than happy to use C# and .NET as well.
Very, very cool. And so I'd love to hear today about static web apps. And one of the things that I want to make sure everybody knows is that if you want to get some education on this whole huge idea that we're going to be talking about, there is a learning path on Microsoft Learn. You can head there after you finish watching, obviously. Head over there. You'll be able to start taking some interactive courses. You'll gain points. It'll be really cool if you just wanted to click through that, start learning, and not have to pay for it. It's free. So, Anthony, static web apps. I've got a question. There's docs for it, but I'd love to hear your definition. What is Azure Static Web Apps?
Yeah, Azure Static Web Apps is a really easy way of hosting a static web app, but as well as like you can't, you typically a static web app is like a single page application. You typically probably still need some kind of a back end. So we allow you to make it really easily deploy an API, a serverless API using Azure Functions, as well as we make it really easy for you to add a custom domain. We'll give you a free SSL cert, any authentication, routing, authorization. All that stuff's built into the product so that you can, get started with it right away. And a lot of folks are, typically when they kind of start looking at, building static web apps, single page apps, or Jamstack apps, they're quite often kind of, wondering like, what's the difference between, this way of doing things versus, the more traditional way, which is like something like building a React app and then hosting it inside of Express, for example, and then deploying that whole thing. And what we've really seen in the past few years that a lot of people have been trying to separate the two pieces. So we wanted to be able to run the React app, on a CDN because it's all static and just serve that super, super fast. And then the parts that we need to kind of do the server-side logic on, we still want to call something. And if we were kind of using, Express or something, we would be hosting the server that just sits there and maybe just responding to things, once in a while. And if you're serving your React app from there, its only job is really to serve the React app. So by pulling them apart into, a really fast, kind of globally distributed kind of content serving platform like Static Web Apps on Azure, what you're able to do is really kind of use the right technologies to do the right things. So now your users, your customers are able to access your website super fast. And then when you have to do anything dynamic, it's going to call Azure Functions behind the scenes. So when you're not making any calls, it's just not just sitting there idle. But if all of a sudden you have like 1,000 people on your site or more, we're just going to scale out and be able to handle that traffic for you. So with that kind of architecture, it really kind of helps build a really kind of scalable and performant app.
And what I really enjoy about the service, because I've played around with it a bunch since it first launched in preview, it's been free in preview. So if you want to start using it, please, there's $200 in free credit for Azure, but that service you can get actually for free while it's in preview. I really love how it ties together CI/CD for you. And so rather than having to manually configure your workflow, Azure Static Web Apps kind of creates a DevOps environment for you, if you will, by saying, okay, every single time we say add something to our main branch, we'll automatically kick off a run of our CI and CD process. And so there's no real manual intervention here. It's mostly just git, commit, and you're here to go.
Yeah, that's really our goal, is to we want to kind of have you follow these so-called good practices, best practices by actually using like a CI/CD workflow like GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps Azure Pipelines. But we don't really want you to actually focus on that at all. So what we do with GitHub Actions is that we use it behind the scenes, But you don't even really have to know too much about it to get started. You can just get started with your app. We'll help you push your app to GitHub. We'll set up that action for you, and our GitHub action is actually it's actually going to automatically build most apps out there without any modification and deploy it for you. So behind the scenes, it's doing a lot of stuff, but you don't really need to know it. You only have to crack it open when you need to make any modifications. Now that you have a pipeline, for example, typically what people do is they start, adding some tests to it and stuff like that, so that you can actually have a really kind of robust pipeline that doesn't just deploy your app. You're running some tests in there. Perhaps you're running accessibility tests in there as well. You're running end-to-end tests. Really anything that you typically might want to do in a CI/CD pipeline, you can do, but you can get started without knowing any of that.
Yeah, I think it just adds some simplicity for users by taking out some of that overhead that you need to actually do in order to have an application deployed. I've seen, like when I was working with Hugo, how the build process actually will render the static pages for you. It'll make sure it actually works. So if maybe there's a problem in your markdown file where you're actually building it, it'll tell you, it'll stop the process, it'll avoid bad commits. And I think that that's another really, really big part of this, is that we don't necessarily want bad code to go into our deployment. And even if we're talking about, your personal blog that you're using in this service, it's important to still have good practices. And the more we practice and the more we try all this, the more success we see.
Yeah, so, definitely.
Anthony, the next thing I really wanted to ask, so one of the great parts that you mentioned just a few minutes ago was adding Azure functions into this. And one thing that I was curious about is that, are we kind of just throwing away a lot of that boilerplate code for, say, other services that we need to kind of implement? Like, is that kind of the big idea here?
Yeah, so with Azure Functions, you can throw away, I guess, two types of boilerplate code. One is, like I kind of mentioned, like an Express app before, or if you're building an ASP.NET app, you have to kind of write, the program itself, right? You have to kind of, set up your middleware. You kind of have to write, if it's an ASP.NET app, you kind of write your controllers and then your actions. But really, the parts of the code that you want to write are really just what executes when you receive an HTTP request. So Azure Functions really makes it easy for you to just write that part of code without you having to care about the rest of it. And then the other part is Azure Functions has this concept called bindings, which what you can do is, if you wanted to write, say, for example, something to Cosmos DB, and I think I have an example later on, where I'll actually kind of walk you through, with like literally one line of code, you can write a document out to Cosmos DB and a single line of code to read it back. So you don't have to bring in any SDKs. So all the boilerplate that you typically had to write to kind of talk to a database, again, you have to basically write 5 lines of code to set this thing up. You have to make sure that you're, instantiating the client and disposing it properly. All that stuff you don't have to worry about anymore. The input and output bindings do that all for you. So, if you wanted to just drop a message onto a queue, or, send a message over WebSockets using Signal service, you don't have to know about how to do any of that. You're just basically in your code, just working with objects, and then you're just returning an object, and the binding just takes care of taking an object and doing the right thing with it based on how you configured, where that output's going to.
Very cool. And of course, local development tools, you've got that part of this as well. I know you're going to try to show me some of this today. And that lets me into giving you a little bit more room here now to show me. You've got your screen up and ready. I'm going to add it to the stream, and I'm going to kind of let you kind of kick off what it is you wanted to tell us about today.
Yeah, let's do that. So what I have on the screen right now is the entry point to our documentation. We have tons of docs here. We actually have a lot more on the way. So really comprehensive documentation. But I'm going to use this doc to quickly kind of walk you through what Static Web Apps is. I kind of talked about it a little bit already, but it has a nice diagram. So it gives me something nice to talk to. So the idea is that you write your code, whether it's just a front end app or it's a front end app plus some Azure functions. They would live both in the same repo, and then you would just push that repo off to GitHub or to Azure DevOps, and eventually we're going to support others like other repositories as well, like Bitbucket and GitLab and things like that. And then what happens after that is every time you make a commit, we leverage GitHub Actions in Azure DevOps or Azure DevOps to actually do a build and basically take your app and build the front end, build the function app, and then send that off to Azure. And then we will distribute your static content around the world so that it reaches your users really, really quickly. And we'll also deploy your Azure function app as well, pretty much in the same command or in the same workflow. So so your whole thing is deployed, and it's usually ready in a couple minutes.
Very, very cool.
Yeah, and then down here we have just some key features. I already talked about how we have hosting, we have serverless APIs, first-class integration with GitHub and Azure DevOps. But we have some other things as well. If you want to bring a custom domain, we'll give you a free SSL certificate. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, and if we have time, we'll actually try setting one up so you can see how that works. And let's see what else. Yeah, I talked about authentication and authorizations before. So without you doing anything, if you want your users to log in using GitHub or Twitter or Facebook or any of those providers, that comes out of the box. So so you can so you can just forward your users to these special URLs, and then we'll do all that login for you. We're also coming up with ways to actually allow you to customize that, but out of the box, currently, you can use these providers without you doing really anything.
OAuth is so important because it's become kind of like our standard now for authenticating into web apps. People don't want to have another set of credentials to work with, it seems like. And we also have two-factor and things like that involved into our existing credentials. And so it makes a lot of sense that you've gone ahead and you said, this is a first-class part of our service.
Yeah, we don't want to deal with user accounts and any of that stuff at all if we don't, if we don't have to. And with Azure Static Web Apps, we even take take away another step, which is actually integrating with these providers, so you can get that out of the box. And then once your customers or users logged in, you can actually say that for this route or for these routes, lock it down to these types of users. So you can actually assign users to custom roles. So you can say, like you can pick 5 people that are, in an admin role. So when they log in, they can actually have access to certain routes, while the rest of, your users, whether they're anonymous or they're just, logged in, but not, in one of those roles, they won't have access to. So you have really fine-grained control over stuff like that. You have control over other routing rules as well. One thing that we'll probably see in a bit is that a lot of static web apps require this thing called a fallback route to work, and we make that super easy to set up. And then the last thing I wanted to point out is that you kind of mentioned earlier on about like a good CI/CD workflow should have ways for you to, even for your personal blogs, for you to make sure that you're kind of doing the right thing and that you're not actually breaking your site and all that stuff by making a change. So we support staging environments out of the box. Currently, it only works with currently it only works with GitHub Actions, but we're also trying to figure out how to enable it for these other providers as well. And what that means is that when you submit a PR to your repo on GitHub, we'll automatically stand up a staging environment for you with a unique URL they can go to just preview your site to make sure everything's fine before you go ahead and push it to your production environment.
Now, I know it's a very, very different service from the standard app service that the Azure already provides. But I was curious, are you thinking about adding something like slots at some point?
Yeah, so it's a very it's a pretty common ask, and we're trying to figure out how to do that, like basically implement that, and whether or not that fits in our existing workflow. Currently, what we're thinking is that we'll have basically branches that match to static web apps, or PRs that match to environments. And then for you to promote from one to the other, you would basically just push to your main branch. If you want to deploy to production, basically merge domain, and then it'll just kind of go to production. But both you and I kind of come from a bit of a DevOps background, and we know that some folks might not actually want to do that. A pretty common kind of idea in the DevOps world is that you want to have that one single build, right? That you run all your tests on, and then you take that build through all your different stages. And the only thing that you change are configuration. You don't rebuild the thing. You take that same artifact and you deploy it to all the different places. So currently that doesn't quite fit the static web apps workflow. And we're trying to figure out how we can work basically slots into it, which would allow you to do things like, basically push this build to a slot and then just swap that into production, right? So it's the same build that you kind of tested. It just gets swapped in production. And you also get blue-green deployments as well.
That was the main reason why I was asking about slots, because blue-green, some people just develop that way. They like the idea of tearing something down and building it back up. And I suppose one of the great things about static web apps is being able to customize your domain. So, I mean, it could be as simple as just creating a new version and changing DNS if you really need to, making that actually a part of your pipeline.
Yeah, I think that's currently what you would have to do, but we want to see how we can make that easier for you. So that I think the first thing is we need to figure out whether it makes sense for us to provide stable domains. Like say for example, you have one branch that maps to this domain, one branch that maps that domain, and then after that, if we're able to implement that, then maybe we would swap the two. That's definitely on our radar, but yeah, there's still some thinking to do in terms of how that fits into the static web apps workflow.
Very cool. So I want everybody to just take a moment, and I wanted to remind you that, one, please send your comments and questions in the chat. We're taking it live. I've got both the LearnTV questions up, so if you want to send it that way, there's that chat right on the right. But while you're also there, don't forget there's the poll. Take the poll. And so while you're there, take the poll. Go ahead, start asking your questions. We're going to try to get to all of them today, and hopefully we're going to learn something really, really cool. So what do you got next to show me, Anthony?
Yeah, I think we should just dive right in and try to deploy an app, and then we'll start from there, and then we'll kind of just layer on maybe functions and stuff like that, and then see how much time we have to explore some of the features.
Very cool. Rich says, better name for today's FunBytes is how you can host your Hugo blog for free. I mean, Rich, you're not that far off. At least it's free for now. And so make use of that service while you can.
Yep. And I know it's not officially announced yet, but our intention is to keep the free tier beyond GA. So use it now, use it in the future. We will have a free tier for you. We'll add other kind of pricing options in different ways too. If you need to add some more advanced features, for example. But what you see currently in the free tier, I would expect that to exist indefinitely.
Yeah, I mean, there's some already existing free tier for a bunch of our services that we provide. I know that Cosmos DB has its free tier, a bunch of our others. So it wouldn't be shocking to me to have a free tier stick around.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. So what you're seeing on my screen right now is a very vanilla Vue.js application. I literally ran two commands before the show started, which is Vue create to just create a very initial app, and then I added some routes to it by saying Vue add routes or something like that, and that's it. So it's a pretty boring app, but I'll just kind of quickly show you that it actually runs locally. So that would be. Let me close this. It's npm run serve. And every framework has a different verb, so hopefully this is the right one. Looks like it is because it's doing something. Yeah, don't hold your breath though. This is not a very exciting site. But I just want to make sure that it works locally first. Sure. And it's at port 8080. All right, it works. Super exciting. And we're going to try to deploy this to Azure. So I'm inside VS Code, And I have the Azure Static Web Apps, well, as well as some other extensions installed. But the one that we're going to kind of talk about today is the Azure Static Web Apps extension.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have that installed already. And what I can do is click on Create Static Web App. And then I can choose my subscription. Because this app is currently just living on my machine right now, so the first thing that we need to do is push it to GitHub. So it's going to ask me, do I want to push it to a new repo? Sure. And then I'll choose my org, as well as I'll just take the default name. I think it's the folder name. And what the heck, let's make it public. Okay, so now that's basically what I'm calling that was the settings for the GitHub repo. Now I'm kind of onto the settings for the static web apps resource that we're deploying to Azure. So I'm just going to take the default as well because I hate naming things. And then the next thing it's going to ask me for is what kind of app is it? And then we know about quite a few of them, but if you have anything else, feel free to just choose custom. What these settings do is that they will just apply some presets. So we know that for example, for Vue, the output folder tends to be dist. So it's just going to set that, for example.
And like Hugo, it's public, and I think the same with Gatsby. So you don't actually have to go in there and figure out it's pre-configured for you. Yeah,
and we're actually thinking through how we can even make this smarter. VS Code has access to all your files. We actually know, by looking in package.json that this is Vue.js. So we think we can even make this process even easier. But for now, we'll just choose Vue.js. And I'll just choose a location. Because our content's distributed around the world, you don't typically have to worry about the location. Currently, that's where the function app is deployed to. But we can kind of picture in the future that we may actually spread your function apps around the world too. So so definitely pick that. Yeah, and then definitely pick a location. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, and we can see the plugin is already kind of add that information window that just went away, but it showed that it's on GitHub. It showed that there's that it's live, to be honest.
Yep. And actually, I should have taken your prompt and actually clicked it, but because I didn't, I actually have to go look for it now.
Sure, no problem. It's why when we do it live, these things, we figure it out. And so, of course, Anthony is on GitHub. So if you want to find any of his repos, yep.
All right, and I'm hoping that it's the top one there, and there it is. So, I'll point out a couple of things. So what that process did was quite a few things. So one is that it created an Azure Static Web Apps resource in the cloud, so a place to host our app. And then we also committed a secret into our repo.
I love that it handles secrets for you. This can be kind of confusing for people, especially new users. So having this authentication, and just so everybody knows, there's an authentication piece that you do for GitHub before you get started, either within the portal or also in VS Code.
Yeah, so I've done that before. So the extension actually remembered my my GitHub login. Otherwise, you're right, it would have prompted me. So it committed a token for deployment, and then the other thing that it did was that it committed. I'll make this bigger. A workflow, and then you can see that the workflow has some key items in here. In that it knows about my where my app is, as well as the output location. And then it also even gave me a place for the API later on if I need to add it. And then what that results in is a GitHub action run that's going on right now. And it actually says that it's complete. So I can just click, oh no, it went away. So down here somewhere, I have my link and click that. And here's my site. And very exciting. So there's some stuff I want to show you is that if I, right now I click around, it's actually doing client-side routing. So if I refresh this page, it actually doesn't exist, right? Because on the server, there is no /about page. It only exists on the client. So typically what people do is that you need to set up what's called a a fallback route. And
Okay.
we can, if you want to see that, we can actually do that really quickly here.
Sure.
You just have to create a file named static web app.config.json. And we're also working with the VS Code folks to actually make this easy to create, so you don't actually have to remember the name, because sometimes even I get it wrong. But it's all in documentation right now. And then we already have the schema kind of created for it. So all the IntelliSense works, and then by default, we'll be able to add in what's called a fallback route. And then if I were actually just to commit this and say add fallback, commit that, I'll go ahead and push it. And then it's actually going to go and kick off. Oh no, what happened? Messed up. That's okay. The reason that didn't work is because what it did was that we committed the workflow to the GitHub repo, but I never pulled it down. But I'll just click this magical button that's actually going to do a pull, merge, and push all in one go, and that's what just happened. So that's going to go off and deploy. Are there any questions before I kind of move on to maybe we can deploy a function? Maybe we can set up a custom domain. Like what do you want to see, Jay?
I'd love to see some stuff about authentication. I love to see about customizing it, especially you said because there's SSL. So one of the things I remember from being a sysadmin is that having to manage SSL certificates on the server side and having to rotate them out and things like that. And so if you're telling me that you're doing that for us, it looks really cool to me.
Yeah. So let's see what we should do here. So to get SSL, if I look at the site right now, it's already being served over SSL. It's kind of tiny up top, but it's being served over SSL. But what we can do is actually we can go and add a custom domain so that we can see how it gives us an SSL cert.
Sure.
I need to find this thing. What's it called? Guess I shouldn't ask you. I just look for it. I should know these things, but I don't. Okay, it's this one, AzureFunBytes. And so you can see, you can see traffic and all that stuff in here. Pretty typical stuff. But we can go over to custom domains, and I can add one. And I'll say AzureFunBytes AnthonyChu.com. Click next, and then it's going to tell me to go ahead and please set up this particular a CNAME to my host name, basically. So I don't want you to see this, so I'm going to be on another screen here.
Sure,
and
no problem.
I'm going to bring up my DNS provider, and I'm basically just going to add that record, and hopefully I do it right. If I do it wrong, then I don't know, bad things may happen. Let's see, AzureFunBytes. Paste that in.
And while you're doing that, I got a quick question for you. Rich wants to know if there are any plans to support Azure DevOps repos.
Yeah, so currently, not currently, as of last week, we support Azure DevOps repos as well as using Azure pipelines to deploy. So we have documentation. So if you kind of go to our documentation on the side, I think it's under tutorials. There is a tutorial on how to do this with Azure DevOps. It's a little bit more manual in that you kind of have to set up your workflow yourself for now. But we are working on trying to see how we can make that a little bit more streamlined, just like the GitHub Actions one. But a lot of folks have had pretty good success with it so far already. And really kind of excited to see a whole bunch of folks who were unable to use GitHub for whatever reason, now able to use Azure DevOps to deploy.
Very, very cool. So now you're going to validate your CNAME, I see.
Yeah, so it's just validated, and I'm just going to go ahead and add it. So what validate did is that it just kind of checked to make sure that I set it up properly before I click this big button. I think it probably takes a minute or two. So what it's doing right now is that it's actually configuring the domain, both on the service, as well as obtaining an SSL cert for us. So, and it does this automatically, and it's doing it for free, and it's going to take about a minute or so.
Is it using something like Let's Encrypt, or are we the distributor or provider?
We're using a service called DigitCert to do it, and I think
Okay.
this is, this is the same way that we're kind of getting certificates for App Service. Also has free certs. Some other, I think Azure CDN provides free certs as well. So we're all using a very similar mechanism to do this.
And that's a big deal because, not to go back into the back in the day thing again, but getting a certificate, took money, it took time, it took valid verification of certain things. The fact that you can get a certificate and be SSL enabled right out of the box of this service is just really cool.
Yeah. I remember having to run all sorts of commands. I copy and pasted on my web server machine.
RSJ keygen.
Yeah, I don't know if you memorized it. I could never remember it. Even right after I do it, I don't even know if I do it right. Send it off, and then and then hope that they give me a cert. Don't have to do any of that.
Always had my little hints file with my copy and paste. Just fill in the two variables that I needed to for the name and something else, and just.
Yeah. So behind the scenes, you can kind of picture basically, us doing this automatically for you. We don't have people running around running those commands. I think we have that automated, but it's basically doing the same thing. It's basically doing the same thing. So while that's happening, it's taking longer than I thought it would. Let's go back over to VS Code, and should we show how to add a function?
I think that would be really, really awesome because I know functions are one of the things that make this go from static to dynamic.
Yeah, so let's do that. We don't have a ton of time, so I'll just quickly add a function, and then you kind of have to imagine how your front end would call this function. So again, using our VS Code extension, there's already a command here that says create HTTP function. So my app is just a plain Vue app right now with no knowledge of even Azure Static Web Apps really outside of that workflow. I'm going to choose that command to create an HTTP function. And I want to use JavaScript, and I'll call this, I don't know, like hello or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to go ahead and create this API folder for me with a function in there. And this function is the standard, Azure function that you always get out of the box that kind of says hello to you. And just in the interest of time, I'm not going to make any changes to it, but I will show you how to run it. So there's two ways of running it. Actually, there's probably more ways to run it than two. One is, if I press F5 right now, it'll actually go and start up the Azure Functions project, and it'll attach a debugger. So if I needed to, run a debugger, that's how I would do this. But we also, just this week, we shipped a local CLI for working with static web apps. Mm-hmm. So the problem that it solves is that without it, what you would typically do locally on your machine is that you have to figure out how you can emulate what's happening in the cloud. So in the cloud, we're running, basically like a web server that's serving all your static assets. Mm-hmm. But when requests come to a certain route, in this case /API, we're actually routing that off to to the function app. So in the cloud, that all works fine and it's all great. So you have this one single domain that you hit that is both your front end and your back end. But locally, typically what you would do is you would kind of do the npm run serve thing for the front end, start up the function app on the back end. You have two different ports. So now the next thing that you got to do is spend hours trying to figure out how to set up cores so that one can call the other. And you also don't have access to things like how do I test the authentication that you would have in the cloud and stuff like that. Sure. So that's what this emulator or this CLI does, is that it can start up an emulator that is able to kind of take all this stuff for you, and so you don't have to worry about it. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'll still start up my my front end dev server. The CLI or the emulator that's in the CLI is able to serve like static files from a folder, but it's also able to kind of proxy to a local dev server. So in this case, I've started the local dev server that we're using before. What this allows me to do is I can really iterate quickly on my front end, and this thing is just going to keep rebuilding the app, right? Okay. And I don't have to exit it at all. So like I actually want this thing running. I don't want to rebuild the app myself. So this is what I'm doing for the front end. And if I wanted to, I can also start up the back end, like the function app myself as well by pressing F5. But in this case, I won't. So I'm just going to open another kind of terminal, and then I will type SWA, Static Web Apps, start. And then I will give it the location of the front end dev server here. So I'll say localhost :8080, and I'll also tell it that my API app is in the API folder. So what it's going to do is it's going to go and start up this emulator thing. It's going to forward my basically my static traffic to the emulator, or so to the local development server, and then anything that to slash API to a function app that is also started for me as well.
And this is all brand new, right? This is like, if I'm right, you just released this recently, correct?
Yeah, it's been open source for a little while, but I think it's finally at a place now where it's like, okay, like it's feature complete enough that a lot of folks can get a lot out of it. So we made the announcement this week. So now if I go over here, instead of going to port 8080, I can go to port 4280. I think that's the port for the emulator. You can see I see the same site. I can go to about, so all this stuff still works. Nothing super exciting there. But if I go to /API/hello, it's actually hitting my function app now.
Oh.
And then I can now, like do the thing that it's telling me to do, which is like name equals Anthony or something like that. And it's going to say hi to me back. So it's calling the function app when I hit the function app route. And yeah, so really easy way to kind of test, your front end app with the back end app. They're both kind of serve the report 4280. So all your calls are just, to the same origin. So you don't have to work, bother with cores or anything like that. And any routing rules that you have set up on your in your config file, those will load as well. So that if you have, like if you're blocking certain routes, based on a user's roles, this thing will actually help you test that out as well. And one thing I'll show you as well, since we talked about auth, and that
Sure.
is that I'll show you how how the local CLI helps you with auth. So before this existed, the only way to really test auth locally is you almost have to like put some code paths in your either your Azure function or your front end code that says, if I'm running locally, just pretend to be Anthony or pretend to be Jay. And then when it's in the cloud, they basically use use the actual identity. And it's really annoying, and it's really hard to kind of test, using different usernames or different roles and stuff like that. So what the emulator allows you to do is you can just go to the same kind of login URLs that we have in the cloud. So for instance, if you go to /auth/login/GitHub, it's going to, in the cloud, it would actually go and take you to GitHub, so you can log in there, and it'll bounce you back to the site, and now you're logged in. Locally, what we do is that we don't integrate any of that with the with the identity providers. It's a lot of work, and it actually doesn't really kind of give you any benefits. So what we're actually letting you do is that because you're just running locally, if you want to test, if you want to be Jay today, you can basically just whatever user ID you tend to be in the database, you can actually have a real name. You can put down, any kind of like role that you want to be logged in as. So if you want to test out, hey, I want to be logged in as admin and see what happens, and I can log out and try to be what happens if I'm not admin. You can really easily do this with this screen here. And then when you click log in, it just does the exact same thing as what it does in the cloud. It bounces you back. But what you can do now is from your front end, you can say /auth/me. And you can see that the identity that I entered there is available to my function app. How you would see this in the function app is that it gets passed through in a trusted header that you can parse and actually see that, hey, the person calling this function is Jay, and I can trust that it's Jay. So all this stuff you can test locally now just by using, like these local endpoints. And then to log out, you would call log out, I think. And now we're logged out. So if I go back to this /me endpoint, I refresh, I'm no longer
no value.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm going to give you a second because I have a question for you.
Okay.
But I want everybody to remember, obviously, take the poll. Head over to aka.ms/LearnTV. Love to hear from you. And also, we got about maybe 15 minutes left. So if you have any more questions, comments, whatever it is you want to talk about related to static web apps. I'm not going to talk to you about, your problem with your sync. That's not what we cover here. But we do cover some plumbing, if you will, in the cloud. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about plumbing in the cloud. But there's one thing I want to ask you, because you had mentioned it as something we could talk about today, is Jamstack apps. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of give me an idea of what a Jamstack app is and how you work with it in Azure Static Web Apps?
Yeah, so Jamstack app is really a fancy name of saying an app that has some kind of a static front end. So that's, that's typically a single page app. So it's whether it's Angular, Vue, or React, or Blazor. And then, with some kind of an API or backend microservices that you call. So what the J stands for is, I believe, is JavaScript, A is API, and M is markup. So they really had to stretch to come up with this with this acronym here. But it's pretty catchy. It's pretty catchy. We all like jam. It's tasty.
Sure.
And it's really stuck. In terms of both a name as well as a pattern for a way of actually building these apps.
Very, very cool. So I'd love to see what else you got for me. We got about a good 10 minutes left, 15 minutes left, somewhere in there. Is there another big service as part of this that you'd like to show me out?
Yeah, so let's do two things. One is what I did while we were talking is I just pushed these changes for the API. So let's see if that gets deployed. And then what we can do after that is let's take a look at maybe one or two examples of a more kind of a fuller kind of blown app that's built with static web apps and other services in Azure, like Cosmos DB or Azure Signal service or something like that.
Works for me. Let's do it.
Yeah, and I'm just talking because I'm stalling because we're waiting for this build.
You're waiting for hey, what's the old joke? I'm not being lazy. I'm just waiting for my code to compile.
Yeah, that's right. This is typically the part where I go for a quick coffee. Oh, but it's done. So maybe not a coffee, maybe just grab some water or something. So I need me for my site. I guess it's gone. I'm gonna find it again. Oh, actually, you know what? I can use our new domain name and hope that works too. So what do I call it? AzureFunBytes AnthonyChu.com. I'm hoping this works. Okay, so there you go. So I have an SSL cert. It's kind of small in the corner. So
this is my DNS an applause for working, because it's always DNS, so it's working this time.
Yeah, exactly. If I go here, I think I set up that fallback route. So if I refresh this page, you can see that the about page works now. And if I go to my API, I think API/hello, if I can spell. You can see, the API, and I'm not going to call it, right? And then also, I'll just quickly kind of show you that auth endpoint we saw before locally. This is what it looks like in the cloud. So I go auth/login/GitHub. It's going to go bounce me off to this consent page, like I do with anything like this. I just click OK. And then I'm already logged into GitHub. So if I weren't, or I needed to kind of authorize this app, it'll kind of take me to one or two more screens on GitHub to do this. But it just kind of bounced me back to my site. And again, so now I'm logged in. So if I go to /auth/me, you can see that I'm logged in as myself. So this is my actual GitHub handle, as well as the roles that I'm in, which is by default just authenticated. And then so if you needed to kind of do any authorization based on this identity, both on the front end or on your functions, you have full access to that.
Love it.
Yeah, so it deployed and it worked, so that's great. So I think we'll just spend the rest of the time just kind of maybe taking a look at one or two kind of deployed sites that are kind of using Azure Static Web Apps and some other services.
Sure. So, you have something that's used, say, Cosmos DB?
Yeah. So let's see. This one here I haven't shown for a while. So I'll kind of quickly go open this. So it's our friend Bit and their friends. And so this is initially made for some online conference. And we're like, yeah, wouldn't it be cool, if we kind of just create a page like this so that, as the parents, watch the conference, the kids can have something to do. Our good friend Aaron Powell created this, and you can actually do different things. If you want to do connect the dots and stuff like that. But one thing that I was hoping, that I was thinking of is like, wouldn't it be cool if like the kids, like during the pandemic, the lockdown and stuff, can like actually just draw stuff with their friends. So what I did was I added that capability. So initially this app was just completely static. It just loads in your browser. When you draw the lines, it just kind of stays in your browser. But what I added was, a couple of functions, as well as a little bit of code, to basically make this collaborative. So I added this little button. So when you click that, what it's going to do is it's actually going to generate you a new URL that's pretty, long. And I'll shrink this window. I'll copy this. All new. I'll paste that in. And like theoretically, I can pass this and send this off to really anyone who wants to try it. But now what you can see is if I go and draw, I don't know if you can see it here. If I refresh it, it might actually.
Oh, yeah. So it's keeping all the points. So it's like remembering the pixels that you've actually gone across. Am I getting it right a little? Like you're tracking pixels?
Yeah, you're precisely right. So basically, all the code that Aaron wrote to draw the pixels on the screen, I just tapped into that event to just recorded what the pixels were, and I just sent that off to a function four times a second. And then behind the scenes, I'm both saving it to Cosmos. So when I refresh the page like this, the lines come back, as well as I'm broadcasting it to this service called SignalR service. So basically, all the browsers that are connected will connect to this thing called SignalR service, which basically connects over WebSockets. And then functions can talk to it to basically broadcast events. So basically, the lines come into a function. I save those lines, and then I pump those out to SignalR service and say, hey, send basically these messages to all the browsers. And then that's how, basically when I draw, the lines show up everywhere.
Very cool.
And I'll kind of quickly show you the code for it. So I'll make this big again. And then, so from my Static Web Apps resource, I can quickly click and go to my repo. It's a little bit bigger. I'll show you the important stuff, which is this is the function that is actually called 4 times a second when I'm drawing. That's basically just getting coordinates and colors of the lines. And the function itself is 12 lines long. So this entire function is taking the lines from the body of the request. So it's just a chunk of JSON. Okay. One line of code to save it to Cosmos. And then another line of code to basically broadcast it over SignalR to all the clients that are connected using WebSockets. So you just kind of have to return an object of this shape, and SignalR will do that for you. So basically, here are the lines, and here's that's the data. The rest of it, it's very simple to do. And the reason that it's that simple is because this function is configured with those bindings that I was talking about earlier. So this is the HTTP endpoint. So this is always in every single function. But the interesting stuff is down here. So I have one for a SignalR output binding. So this tells functions that whatever I return from the function, send that off to SignalR service, which is what was like that return line in the code that we saw earlier. And then this one here says, hey, whatever I pass off to this Cosmos DB thing, send it off to Cosmos DB. So really, some JSON and a couple lines of code is all it took to write out those that data and also broadcast it. And then same thing when somebody joins a session, it's going to ping this API here, retrieve session. And again, this time I'm using an input binding. So an input binding is able to pull stuff from data sources when a function executes. So here I'm just saying, pull everything belonging to this session from Cosmos DB. And then my code is literally a single line of code that just takes the data that was pulled from Cosmos, and I'm just returning it back to the browser. I'm not doing anything, right? So I think we saw about, probably 15 lines of JavaScript code. And maybe 30 lines of JSON, but that's all it took to build that entire app. So
That was really, really, it doesn't seem that difficult. It just, to integrate these services together. Obviously, you've got to sit and you've got to write the code and all that. But getting it all to work together, wrapping it up in a bow doesn't seem like there's a ton of difficulty involved. And so someone has a question, and I'm going to bring it up because we got about less than 5 minutes left. Can static web apps be used with an app service plan?
No, they're actually like quite separate things. So, so static web apps is, I think it's still under the app service umbrella.
Sure.
But they're very separate things, and there's not really even a concept of an app service plan behind it. Because the whole goal is to actually decouple kind of like the compute from the thing that's serving the app.
Sure.
Although there is some kind of compute in there, in that we do the routing stuff, we do the auth stuff, but really like just a thin layer on top of something that serves your static content really performantly, and then your function apps, which kind of runs in a consumption plan, right? So there isn't really like a true one-to-one mapping to from that kind of model to a to an app service plan. So you don't really get to choose what that is, but like how how you're eventually going to be charged for stuff like this. It won't be based on how many CPUs that you have. Right, it'll probably be based on like something like bandwidth, for example. So
it's like kind of the way a CDN is set up, whereas you're not necessarily concerned about compute. You're more concerned about actually serving it fast.
Yeah, exactly. So so typically you're not thinking about compute. You're just kind of leaving that off to us and trusting us that we're going to have we're going to have the right scale and the right performance for your app.
Very cool. So Anthony, we're just about getting to the end of it. And so what I wanted to do before we finished up is I wanted to take a look at our poll. And are people using static web apps for their website? And overwhelmingly 50% said yes. If you want to keep voting, go ahead. You can head over to LearnTV. We've got got to thank you for that answer that you gave us. But I also wanted to just give it a moment to make sure everybody knows where the documentation is, Anthony. So you can go to this URL for what static web apps is. You can go to Microsoft Learn and check out that whole learning path that exists. Like I said, free education. It's gamified, get some points. And then, of course, you mentioned that as static web apps CLI, which you can go to on npm.js. You can go ahead, I suppose, just npm install -g static web apps CLI and get that on your local environment. See how I actually remembered that? Anyhow, so Anthony, I know we can find you on Twitter. We can find you on GitHub. Is there anything else you got coming up that we should know about?
Let's see. No, not a ton. Just kind of like wandering into some of these streams as you all invite me. And it's been super fun to do these. So especially today, spending an hour to talk about static web apps. But yeah, we're just kind of working hard to try to take this service to GA, hopefully as soon as possible. So just heads down doing that.
Awesome. Like I said, the service has been really fun to play around with. It's been really cool to talk to you today, Anthony. I don't get a chance to do it that much anymore now that we're not on the same team. So I'm really valuing this time today. Thank you so much for answering questions and getting me a little bit more introduced to static web apps.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for having me here.
And everybody, like I said, we're going to give you the big wave goodbye. It was our 1-year birthday. We're going to be back with more next week. Until then, thank you again for watching AzureFunBytes, and I'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.